There is a document, produced by the United States Defense Intelligence Agency, classified for decades. It describes a 1976 encounter between two Iranian Air Force F-4 Phantom jets and an unidentified object over Tehran that disabled the weapons systems of one aircraft. When the pilot attempted to fire, caused both jets to lose instrumentation when they approached within a certain distance, and was tracked simultaneously by ground radar and airborne radar in ways that ruled out atmospheric phenomena and sensor malfunction. The document was eventually declassified and is now publicly available. When researchers at the Scientific Coalition for Ufology analyzed it using the same methodology applied to conventional military incident reports, they rated it as one of the most credible and well-documented UAP cases in the historical record, and it is one of 5 cases that share a specific and important property. They were investigated by governments, analyzed by trained military personnel, corroborated by multiple independent sensor systems, and have remained, despite decades of scrutiny, without a conventionally accepted explanation. These are not the most dramatic UFO stories, they are the most credible ones, and the difference between those two categories matters more than most people realize. Start with what makes a sighting credible, because the word gets thrown around without precision. Sight index equals 4-1. The common characteristics of the most credible UFO sightings include multiple reliable witnesses, corroboration by radar or other technical means, visual documentation, and the inability to attribute the sighting to known aircraft or natural phenomena. These sightings typically involve unusual flight characteristics or patterns that cannot be explained by current technology or natural explanations. Sight. This framework immediately filters out the vast majority of reported sightings. Sight index equals 4-1 greater than more than 95% of all UFO sightings can be easily dismissed as military aircraft. Stars, planets, meteors, flares, weather balloons, and man-made hoaxes. Sight. What remains after that filter is applied is a small, specific set of cases where trained observers using calibrated instruments detected something that their instruments and their training could not explain. Those cases deserve examination on their own terms, without the weight of the dismissed majority contaminating the analysis. The Tehran incident in September of 1976 is where the DA document takes you first. In the early hours of September 19, the Imperial Iranian Air Force received multiple civilian reports of a bright object over Tehran and scrambled to F-4 Phantom jets to investigate. The first aircraft, approaching the object, experienced a complete failure of its instrumentation and communication systems. The pilot broke off pursuit. A second F-4 was dispatched. The second pilot obtained a radar lock on an object he described as the size of a 707 tanker aircraft, emitting intense light. When he attempted to fire an AM-9 missile at it, his weapons control panel lost power. The object then released a smaller, bright object that appeared to come directly toward the aircraft. The pilot broke off his attack run. The smaller object returned to the main object. The encounter continued for some time, with the main object making maneuvers and then departing at high speed. The DIA document summarizing this incident notes the simultaneous radar confirmation, the instrumentation failures that correlate precisely with proximity to the object, and concludes that the case represents a legitimate and baffling phenomenon. Sight index equals 5-1 greater than. The Tehran incident stands out for the clear involvement of military personnel and technology, making it much harder to explain away as a mere optical illusion or equipment malfunction. The case remains one of the best documented military UFO encounters of all time. Sight. No explanation has been officially provided. The declassified document is available. The radar tapes no longer exist in accessible form. Now go to a forest in England. December of 1980, Rendlesham Forest, Suffolk, adjacent to 2 United States Air Force bases, RAF Bentwaters, and RAF Woodbridge. In the early morning hours of December 26, security personnel at RAF Woodbridge observed lights in the forest and went to investigate, believing an aircraft might have crashed. What they found was an object in a clearing, a triangular metallic structure, approximately 3 meters across and 2 meters high, with colored lights and markings on its surface. The witnesses touched the object. The next day, investigators found 3 depressions in the ground where the object had rested, each 7 inches in diameter, in a triangular pattern. They measured elevated radiation levels at the site, particularly in the depressions. 2 nights later, the deputy base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, led another investigation team into the forest when the lights reappeared. He recorded the entire encounter on an audio cassette tape, which was subsequently obtained under the Freedom of Information Act and is publicly available. On that tape, Halt and his men can be heard describing a red, sun-like object that pulses and moves through the trees, sending beams of light down toward the ground. One beam strikes the ground 10 feet from where Halt is standing. He describes it on the tape as it happens, in the flat, professional voice of a man trying to document something he cannot explain. Sight index equals 5-1. Unlike many UFO sightings dismissed as misidentified aircraft or weather phenomena, the Rendlesham case involved trained military observers who were familiar with the technology of the time. The British Ministry of Defence investigated, but their report left many questions unanswered. Site. The radiation readings at the landing site were measured at 25 times normal background levels in the depressions. The British government's official position is that the case poses no threat to national security. It has never provided an explanation for the radiation readings, the ground impressions, or the object described in the Deputy Base Commander's own recorded account. Go back further, to 1949. Los Alamos, New Mexico, the most classified facility in the United States, home to the scientists who built the atomic bomb and were now developing the hydrogen bomb. Between 1948 and 1951, a series of bright green fireballs were observed repeatedly over and near several sensitive nuclear installations in New Mexico, including Los Alamos and Cynthia. Site index equals 3 to 1 greater than in 1949. A conference in Los Alamos of top physicists and scientists, including those who worked on the Manhattan Project, tried and failed to explain the green fireballs that had been spotted over the nuclear lab. One theory held that they were meteors entering the atmosphere, but a prominent astronomer noted that nothing like this had ever been observed in the case of meteorite drops. Site. The conference was convened specifically because the objects were appearing repeatedly over nuclear weapons facilities, which the assembled scientists recognized as a pattern. Requiring explanation, the fireballs moved horizontally rather than following the curved trajectory of meteors. They appeared at low altitude and at similar altitudes consistently. They were observed by dozens of trained scientists, military personnel, and pilots. Dr. Lincoln LaPaz, one of the world's foremost authorities on meteors at the time, investigated, ostensibly, and concluded they were not meteors. He was unable to identify what they were. The phenomenon continued for years. No official explanation was ever provided. The 1949 conference transcript is one of the documents that was released in the 2026 Pursuit disclosure, confirming that the assembled scientists of the Manhattan Project irreformally and collectively failed to explain what was flying over their most sensitive installations. Then there is the 2004 USS Nimitz encounter, which differs from these historical cases in one critical way. It has video. Site index equals 5 to 1 greater than in November 2004. United States Navy pilots from the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz encountered a strange, white, oval-shaped object off the coast of Southern California. Site. What distinguishes the Nimitz case from almost every other UAP report in history is the convergence of independent sensor systems, all capturing the same object simultaneously. The USS Princeton, a guided missile cruiser, had been tracking anomalous objects on its SPY-1 radar. For 2 weeks before the visual encounters began, the objects were appearing at 80,000 feet and dropping to low altitude in seconds. On November 14th, Commander David Fravor, in an F-18 Super Hornet, visually observed a white, oblong object hovering over disturbed water, mimicking his movements when he attempted to approach, then accelerating away at a speed he later said he had never seen in his career. A second aircraft captured the object on its FLIR infrared camera. The footage shows the object maintaining a specific orientation regardless of camera movement, moving in ways inconsistent with any known aircraft, and at one point, accelerating out of frame at a velocity that the camera's tracking system cannot follow. The United States Navy authenticated this footage in 2017. The Defense Department confirmed its authenticity again in 2020. The Pentagon's official statement on the Nimitz footage is that it represents unexplained aerial phenomena and that the observations cannot be explained by known aircraft or natural phenomena. Commander Fravor has described what he saw in dozens of on-the-record interviews and in congressional testimony. His account has never varied in any significant detail across nearly 2 decades. Now move to something that happened not in 1976 or 2004, but in late 2025. Site index equals 2 to 1, the most striking document in the Pentagon's May 2026 Pursuit release is an account by a currently serving senior intelligence officer who detailed his experience investigating UFO sightings in late 2025 on board a military helicopter. The officer wrote that he and the crew had a series of close UAP encounters lasting over an hour as they investigated previous sightings. In the distance, he wrote, they saw countless orange orbs swarming in all directions against the backdrop of the mountain. The display lasted several minutes before fading. The pilots and he, using the naked eye, observed 2 large orbs flare up side by side, close to the helicopter, stationary, and just above the rotor disc to their right. Site. The officer writing this report is currently serving. This is not a historical document. It is a contemporaneous account from an active intelligence official, filed through official channels, describing something that happened in late 2025 during a military investigation mission. The report is now public because of the Pursuit disclosure process. The objects it describes have not been explained. The investigation that prompted the helicopter mission, meaning the earlier sightings that made this investigation necessary in the first place, is ongoing. And in the 4th Pursuit release, from 2026. The most recent sensor data comes from the Indo-Pacific Site Index equals 321. The most recent events described in the fourth batch of files came in 2025 near China under the military's Indo-Pacific Command. One video shows a military sensor tracking an area of contrast resembling a six-pointed star over the Yellow Sea. Another seems to track an object over the East China Sea for several minutes. Cite these are current military sensor recordings from the most technologically sophisticated surveillance infrastructure humanity has ever deployed, tracking objects in active operational theaters that have not been identified. What all of these cases share is not a common explanation. They share a common structure, a credible observer or set of observers, using calibrated instruments, in a context where professional accountability creates strong incentives against fabrication or exaggeration, encountered something that their instruments detected and their training could not explain. The Tehran pilots had every professional reason to provide a conventional explanation for what they encountered. Filing a UAP report at the highest level of military seriousness put their careers at risk in ways that identifying a weather phenomenon would not. The Rendlesham personnel recorded their account in the moment, on tape, without the ability to edit their reactions to make them sound more credible after the fact. The Manhattan Project scientists at the 1949 Los Alamos Conference were the most qualified people on Earth to identify unusual atmospheric phenomena and natural physics. They could not explain the green fireballs. The USS Nimitz pilots are among the most experienced combat aviators in the world, trained to identify every known aircraft type and to maintain accurate observation under extreme stress. They authenticated their account publicly, under their own names, for 20 years. Site index equals 1:1, as Robert Powell of the Scientific Coalition for Ufology has noted. Around 6,000 encounters are reported annually by pilots, military personnel, radar operators, and civilians. When trained military pilots, radar operators, and air traffic controllers report something they cannot explain, it is difficult to dismiss as imagination. Cite the cases that survive the filter. The ones that remain unexplained after full investigation by qualified authorities with access to all available data are not numerous. They are specific. And what makes them significant is not that they prove something, it is that they are, in the strictest scientific sense, unresolved, not dismissed, not explained away, unresolved, sitting in official databases, in declassified documents, in authenticated military footage, waiting for a framework of explanation that has not yet been provided. The question of what that framework will eventually look like, whether it turns out to be prosaic or extraordinary, is one that the accumulating weight of these cases is slowly making impossible to avoid.